Our next speaker, Dr. Tina Grotzer, is a faculty of education at Harvard University Graduate School of Education. I'm also an alum there, so I'm really looking forward to listening to her speech. It's gonna be really fascinating, I believe. So open with a little bit of introduction about Dr. Tina Grotzer. She is a cognitive and learning scientist who studies learning and education as it relates to complexity and navigating a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. She is the faculty director of the Next Level Lab, which focuses on new visions for learning that push our ability to innovate and perform at leading edge of our competence. Her work as the principal investigator of the Cognition in a Complex World Lab focuses on the challenges of reasoning about complex schedule forms and building instructional supports for developing sustainability-minded citizen and shifting mindsets from short-term to long-term thinking and towards more global collective perspectives. This work included the EcoLearn projects where she developed virtual worlds and immersive technology-based simulation. So please join me welcome Dr. Tina Grotzer. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me. This is on? Okay, great. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry I wasn't here this morning. I was actually in the most low-tech place possible. I was on a farm doing research on a food project in inner city Boston. So it's a pleasure to be here now. I have done a lot of work in immersive technology, virtual worlds, augmented reality, but I'm actually not going to talk with you about that today. Today, I want to talk with you about AI and how it impacts us as learners, thinkers, and innovators. Because as I listened even to the last panel and hearing the kinds of innovation that people are looking for, this is going to impact the innovators that we are and the innovators around us. So, the world is really complex. It's transforming, it's diverse, it's nuanced. We have sort of a trifecta of things going on with our changing planet, AI, really wonderful neurodiversity coming into the workplace. And Gen AI, it's a really powerful tool and disruptor to the status quo and the ways that we think, learn, and innovate. And a lot of people are worried about it. A lot of K-12 teachers that I work with are really worried about it. And it certainly does have the potential to diminish what we can do. There was an article in the Gazette that they interviewed me for on, is it going to dull our minds? But with the right approach, I think it can actually support expertise and innovation at the highest levels. But it depends what we do with it. So there's been a really big focus on pairing AI with human minds. And I want to talk about what I think that means and what we need to do it well. So I'm going to share with you 7 key points here. First of all, that effective partnering, this is sort of an advanced organizer, so you know where I'm going. I'm going to go through all of these more deeply. That effective partnering with AI really requires us to understand the affordances and limitations of our own minds. And I'm going to argue that we don't at present. Human minds have immense capacity. And, it goes beyond what a lot of us realize. And one of our real superpowers is that we have embodied minds. So we'll talk about that. We also need to know the affordances and limitations of AI, of which there are many. Some people think that AI is going to make us expert. I'm going to try to convince you why I don't think that's the case and why we really need true experts. I'm going to talk a little bit about classical expertise and the importance of it. I'm going to talk a little bit about adaptive expertise and why it's critical to being an effective thought partner with AI. And finally, metacognition has always been the icing on the cake. It has been the thing that makes everything else better that we teach. It is critical today. So that's where I'm headed. So this first one, that we really need to understand the affordances and limitations of the human mind. How are we going to help learners do this? What's involved? Well, some of you may have experienced this, but for decades, educators have taught what good thinkers do. They've studied good thinkers and learners, and they've taught those as strategies and thinking skills. And often that meant the thinkers and learners who did well in school. Well, that's a problem. It's especially a problem for today. So what's good in school is not necessarily good in the outside world. And in a changing world, it's much too limited. Yesterday's forms of thinking are not going to be enough, especially in the age of AI. And this third one, the promise of the neurodiversity of thinkers is really diminished when we're teaching kids the things that a certain subset of thinkers will do. So, what works for one doesn't necessarily work for others. So in our work, we are making a shift from teaching what good thinkers do. I don't know how that question mark got there. It's beyond me. I think that's my arrow. To helping learners develop a user's manual to their mind based upon the wealth of the neuroscience and cognitive science research, helping them to really understand the mechanisms and rationale for how their minds work. So at the Next Level Lab, we have been creating the equivalent of this user's manual. Kids tell me we don't use the user's manual, we never look at it. So think of it metaphorically, but we are really helping them to understand the research behind how their mind works in terms of being embodied, attention, their memory, adaptive expertise. And these are all available on our website. Lots of self-guided modules that people can take. Some other samples. I can help you find them if they're of interest. We're still building them out. So you can find them at the Next Level Lab website. And this is really to get people to think about, if you know the research on your mind says it works in these ways, and if you're dyslexic, maybe it works a little bit differently. If you have ADHD, here's some things you might think about. So what are the assets of each of those kinds of minds, and how do they work? As best we know, we go from something that was teaching thinking skills, substitute in your head an arrow for that question mark, because I made these in PowerPoint, and I think Google had some fun with them. Anyway, so a thinking skills approach would be, we're going to teach somebody how to make decisions by saying, think of things that are good about this decision, the pros, cons, the interesting points, et cetera. It teaches one way of doing it. It's not necessarily bad. It could work, right? But a generative moves way involves taking the research that we already know about the mind and thinking about how it applies to your mind. So, if I know that it's easy to default to my old habits when I'm making a decision, I pause to consider at least two choices that are different from my usual response and will help me start to think more broadly. So I teach a course in the fall called Becoming an Expert Learner, and these are the kinds of things that these students are doing. And they tell me that it resonates through everything else that they do in their time at Harvard. So the second big point, that human minds have immense capacity, beyond what most of us realize, and really this superpower is about having an embodied mind. So if we look at some of the definitions from cognitive scientists, this is from a cognitive psychology, really, Stan DeHaan, we see definitions of learning that look very computational. And in many ways, AI can do a lot of these things. So this is from and it connects to a causal Bayesian framing, if some of you know that research. But human thinkers can do lots more than that. So these are some of the kinds of things that we do. I'm going to share more. Because we have these lovely embodied minds. And it's not that we're thinking from our shoulders up. We are thinking with our entire bodies. And there's really nice work by Antonio Damasio and a fellow named Joseph Ledoux at NYU showing how our embodied minds behave differently. So we have a course called Embodied Minds on the Next Level Lab website These are some of the kinds of things that we invite people to think about. Each one has a set of understanding goals. And I'm just going through these quickly, not expecting you to take all of that in, but just to know that that's all on our website. This is an example, benefiting from background emotions. But before I go on to tell you how wonderful it is that we're embodied, I'm going to show you why I'm glad that robots are not. So this is my one, maybe 30-second video.
What is an overpass? Come on. Question, is that an S or a 5?
I think it's a 5.
I thought so. Frustration loading.
Nobody wants more robot tests, but we could all use more ways to save.
Star latte for Rob Ott or Rob Ott.
Error human.
Switch to Geico for more ways to save.
Yes. And that human knows just to get away from this robot. She's already shifting her body, right? So we have these embodied minds that include what we call somatic markers. It's our body knowledge. It's often what invites very rapid reasoning, acting on intuition. It allows for insights that come from our tacit knowledge, and it creates shortcuts for us. It also, we attend to what's called gut feelings. We all kind of know that intuitively. We talk about my gut just doesn't feel good about this, even if you don't know exactly why yet. So we're using emotion to sort of trigger and to think about whether we should make certain kinds of decisions, but this is often very quick. And we also use it when we're storytelling, we're engaging in the power of narrative. We use it to compel and motivate interest, engagement, empathy. We know what kinds of emotions stories should invoke. And we also engage in something called progressive problem solving. Especially when we're in a flow state, we get very engaged in what we're doing, and we just keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper into that problem space. Productive, optimal experience, it's been called, to be in flow. We've done some research showing that even 4-year-olds can outperform supercomputers. We had a game called Funny Bunny, and they had all kinds of strategies that they had figured out from connecting strategic thinking with their emotions, and they were actually faster than the supercomputer, which was a causal Bayesian reasoning model. So, we have these amazing minds. What about AI? So, we really need to understand the affordances and limitations if we're going to employ them, right? So how do we start to understand them and also realize what makes it powerful, but also what limits it has? So I might be the only one in this room who's old enough to, maybe not, to know Rosie from the Jetsons. But, Rosie, she was the maid. She was a family member. Everybody loved her. She was completely anthropomorphized, so, attaching human qualities to the robot. We think of AI as empathic rather than following rules that let it sound that way, as a more knowledgeable friend. We sometimes think of it as expert, yikes. And we think of it as engaging in reasoning forms when it's actually imitating those forms of reasoning. So this next slide is really, many of you may know this from a more novice perspective. It's talking about the patterns, so the pattern finding behavior of AI, noticing how words and ideas fit together. If you ask it a question, it's predicting, large language models, predicting the next most likely words. There's so many examples that it can look like it's engaging in reasoning, creativity, or conversation. But it doesn't understand like a human. It's following statistical patterns learned during training. I have a more complex version of this slide, but I'm going to jump over it, I think, in the interest of time. I'm also going to say that while scientists believe that we have the ability to reason as causal Bayesians to sum across lots and lots of examples, AI is Bayesian-like in some respects, but it is not a true Bayesian model in some of its behaviors. And I'm going to leave it at that. If anybody's interested in my slides, you can just let me know. So I do want to give this example, though, of a way that AI is really not able to do something that the youngest kids can do, and that's really about insight. So when my son was 4, he asked me to send an email, a note to his babysitter who had moved across the country. And I wrote it. He told me what to write. I wrote it up, and I sent it. And he said, "Mommy, you didn't send it." He's 26 now, so this was a while ago. He said, "You didn't send it." And I said, "Oh, I did. I pushed send." He said, "No, it's still there." I said, "Oh." So email's different than a regular letter. She gets a copy, and I keep a copy. Well, about 2 weeks later, his dad was reading to him. His dad had a cold, and he leaned away. He said, "I don't want to give you my cold." And he leaned away to sneeze. And my son said to him, he said, "Oh, colds are like email." And his dad was like, "What?" And he's like, "No, you get a copy, and I could get a copy." So he saw the essential replicating structure. And as humans, we use things like analogical reasoning to foster insight. So AI cannot quite do it, but it can imitate analogical reasoning. And when I say this, I should say not yet, because we all know, like, next week that could change, right? So in the expert learner class, we ask students to really think about AI and think about human thinkers and look at where the convergences and divergences are and what that means for how you use each one. So how can you use them in the most powerful ways? So I'm arguing here that we need to bring how do they know for AI, it know, how does it know? Here I'm anthropomorphizing. How does it know? And how do we know about our thinking and our minds, an epistemological lens? So how does this key source of information, what are those sources and how do they come about? So AI, it can support thinking. But I'm going to try to help you see why it cannot produce expert thinking, because the patterns are very different in expertise. So these are forms of knowledge, procedural, conceptual, and structural. And one of the questions that teachers often ask, well, I don't have to teach content anymore, right? Well, yeah, you probably do. Why is that? If I can get AI to generate lots of content for me whenever I need it, what does that have to do with me as a learner who deeply understands something? Well, when you are learning information, your brain is restructuring its synaptic pathways. So I might chunk information in one way. A novice in cognitive science might chunk it in another way. Think about the engineers that you know. When you're first starting out, certain things are connected. When you're an expert engineer, you connect things in very different ways. And so the actual structure of the knowledge is changing. And we know that classical experts do really important things. They attend to deeper, more meaningful patterns. They're faster at solving problems when they're within their area of expertise because they've chunked things and they've routinized things in different ways. They tend to have superior memory for certain kinds of information. They make leaps of insight. And that's really important because they know its rules, exceptions, and nuances. So, you know, they have a lot of tacit knowledge. They're using various models. They can switch back and forth between them. And they do engage in progressive problem solving in the areas in their domain. So the brain is really changing the nature of the connectedness of that information to get deep classical expertise. And one of the really important things, and I was thinking about this when the last session was finishing up, is that even though Gen AI can sum across huge amounts of information and it can grab the normative patterns, it misses the edge cases. And because of that, the critical distinctions or exceptions that drive innovation to the next level and higher level performance. Experts notice the exceptions. as much as the patterns and regularities. And if you want to work at the highest levels in your field, and you want to innovate in those fields, you need to notice those things. There's a beautiful story about the guy who discovered the binary pulsar, and how there was this irritating piece of data that just wasn't fitting. But he had programmed the computer, so he knew it wasn't wrong, and it wasn't just an error of the computer. And he just couldn't quite figure it out, so he did what scientists sometimes do and went to dinner. And when he came back, he realized that he had actually discovered a new astronomical phenomenon for which he got a Nobel Prize. So, you know, at the very highest levels, we have to go beyond what AI is presently capable of. And it is those edge cases and those critical distinctions. I'm going to add into this mix adaptive expertise, and it really fits with what I started out with, that we need to know how to learn and use our minds well, that it's critical to effective partnering. I'm just going to summarize this story for you because I know we're a little behind time today, but basically, there are some learners who have learned how to learn about their minds. They have learned to take the time that they need to think about problems. So this young man studied engineering, knows a little bit about it, but when he's in team meetings, he's asking novice questions. He's looking for ways to take all the dynamic visual information and download it, so he sketches drawings. He'll ask questions of clarification about what he's been told, and he poses new questions. This is someone who's becoming an adaptive expert. They're learning how to learn in their field. So this is important because classical expertise can be siloed and rigid. And it's really wonderful when you put novice, adaptive expertise, people have novice, some classical expertise, so they've learned maybe as an undergrad, and some adaptive expertise in with classical experts because they bounce off of each other and they go much further than anyone else could. So they also work at the edge of their competence, but they're really focused on how the human mind is engaging and learning. And that will continue to pay dividends even as ChatGPT and others steal jobs, which is what all the 20-year-olds are worried about. Right, so there's a lot of research on adaptive expertise. This bottom one, 2014, is a student who looked at what the very most expert surgeons did in the case of bile duct surgery, and it was different than what the normative patterns might suggest. So if they're going to do any kind of XR or VR around bile duct surgery, I might need to talk to those guys out there. And my final point here is about metacognition. So metacognition is really, really important. And we need to pair it with AI to really generate the most effective thinking and learning moves. So some broad level comments about metacognition. It's more than reflection. It's actually thinking about your thinking. It has to occur in a serial manner. You can't think and think about your thinking at the same time. It doesn't timeshare. And a lot of teachers think that only the most high-level kids in their class can do it. But what the research shows us is that everyone can do it, and the kids who struggle the most benefit the most from having time to unpack their minds. There are different levels to it. These are the levels that people have talked about for a long time. But it's really a new age for thinking and metacognition. And I've added one at the bottom, that one of the most important things we can do metacognitively is to reflect on and manage those affordances of all kinds of technology augmented intelligence, in ways that complement human intelligence. So in this class, we're doing that. This slide somehow, okay, it's in there twice, it shouldn't be, sorry. So I also asked ChatGPT back in December if AI could engage in metacognition, and just when you're thinking about your superpowers, it can't, just so you know. So, implications for becoming thought partners with Gen AI. So we really have to understand the epistemology of our minds and the basic mechanisms of Gen AI. We need to know the typical misconceptions about how minds and AI work. We need to know the affordances and limitations of our minds and to allocate tasks to AI, that AI does best to AI, and focus on those that humans excel at. We can use AI errors to critically examine output and push our own deep understanding. We really need to focus on the learning process and shifts in conceptualization more than products. There are complex forms of reasoning that are well beyond what AI can do. And we need to continue to develop classical and adaptive expertise if we're going to do exceptional high-level work and really drive the edges of innovation. And we also need to offer good formative feedback to learners as they're learning how to work within their zone of proximal development to see where they can go well beyond Gen AI. So our work is on the Next Level Lab website. We publish all sorts of articles, research, a Substack. I invite you to spend some time there. We recently put out a Substack on this topic. If you want more, it's there. And we're going to thank Accenture Corporate Citizenship, who funded us to do this research and who fund the lab. So I think we have 5 minutes for Q&A. Is that right?
Yeah. Thank you. Now we're open for Q&A. If you have any questions, please raise your hand.
Well, thank you, Dr. Is it pronounced Grotzer?
It's Grotzer, thank you.
Grotzer, beautiful. Thank you so much. So I don't want to put you on the spot, and it probably goes to your point about the diversity of our minds.
Yeah.
In terms of how you utilize the chatbot, and I'm sure it's context related, any specific tips? For example, I know I've asked this with other experts in regards to before ideation, make sure you take the time to have that human ideation before you just allow that to take its place. So any sort of specific, just quick little tips that how you utilize it or what we can do?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to start with, so I teach an instructional design course, and the students are creating all sorts of units, et cetera. So I ask them to think really hard about what the really big, important understandings are from their perspective, because it's usually a topic they know very well. Then I invite them to go back, and you can ask ChatGPT if there are others. You can ask Gen AI or chatbots. Are there other kinds of things that I may have missed? When it comes to structuring instructional designs and units, they often have a much better sense of the kinds of provocations and emotional experiences that will compel their learners. You can get a lot of dry, kind of boring stuff with Gen AI, quite honestly. And you know, this year was the first year I saw a lot of it, where, you know, I've been assigning this project for 20 years, and I would get really great stuff. This year, by the 4th draft, they have a number of drafts, people were handing in 5 times as much content with half the thought. And so we had a real talk about this. And it's like, if you're going to be the best and the brightest going out there and making real change in classrooms, it's got to start with what you know about your learners, what you know about motivation, all the things that compel you to teach this really powerful thing. I said, if you want to hand in something that you've done, you know, and Gen AI has done most of it, it could maybe do B-level work. And there's not one Harvard student who wants a B. So they're like, okay, what do I do? And you know, then we go back over it again. You know, where do you start? So you're really starting with, you have to start with what you know. And then the other thing I think is really important for innovation is looking for the exceptions, looking for the things that fall beyond the normative. Because those edge cases, that's going to be the difference between advancing models in science and whatever your field is. Those are the things that get us beyond where we are now and not just iterating on the status quo. So that's my thought. Now, as I said, it's changing all the time. So, you know, if you ask me next year, maybe I'll say something different, I don't know. But not, it's not there yet. So, yeah.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I'm really curious about your thoughts about kind of the overlap space between embodied experience, like somatic experience, along with metacognition, and then consciousness. Like, how does consciousness play into this, both for human mind and how we think of intelligence, like AI intelligence, but not necessarily consciousness?
I feel like AI will do something like in the when I see Mythos and some of these things coming out, and I'm kind of like, okay, when do we cross over into a space where we start to call it a consciousness? But I do think there's that reflective sense, that sense of reflecting on being a being, holding a body of knowledge, having things that stand out for you. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but also when I see groups working together, we know the consciousness of different thinking partners, and we attribute things to both their thinking but also their feeling. So we can get to know things about a chatbot, but a chatbot often will tell us just what we want to know, and then it will keep revising it until it's gotten closer to what it thinks we want to know. And that's really different than sort of knowing the consciousness of the values, the stories, the embedded knowledge that individuals have. So we do some work on group flow, and we look at gamers and how they game and how they interact with each other. It's really pretty extraordinary. It's not a serial process. And the other thing I would say about consciousness, I don't know if this is really about consciousness, but it's about learning. My husband was complaining, he does data analytics he runs the big division of Quest Diagnostics, and they look at how they can use AI to change, digital twins and all sorts of stuff like that. But he said the problem is it doesn't learn. It's like I teach it something one day, and the next day it's asking me the same kinds of questions. It learns overall, but it doesn't learn as an individual with me. So, when you think about group flow and group dynamics, if you're working in a group, especially in a stressful situation, you're learning all these things about the consciousness of and the knowledge base of the people you're working with. You know who you can count on to fix that problem really quickly. You know who you send in. I don't know. I was watching kids playing Rainbow Six Siege, which is kind of a crazy game to begin with. But you just watch how quickly and their decisions can be made because they have all that knowledge of their team members. I don't think AI is anywhere near there yet, but I don't know if that's really about consciousness. It is about metacognition, about others' minds.
Thank you. I think that now is the time for we wrapping up this session. Please join me one more time to thank Dr. Tina Grotzer for this insightful speech.